This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 43, The Difference Between Content and Copy. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is October 31st, 2013. Wah, ha, 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 ha. Hello and happy Halloween, everybody. Yes, we are coming to you today on All Hallows Eve, otherwise known as Halloween, otherwise known as October 31st. Whatever your plans are this Halloween night or afternoon, I wish you a wonderful time, and let's please be safe out there. Speaking of which, if you are in the mood for some Halloween-themed content advice, earlier this week we've published a fun little blog post called Beware These Content-Killing Monsters. We had a little fun with SlideShare and put together a little presentation about some of the quote-unquote monsters that can kill your content. So if you want to check it out, just click on over to resonancecontent.com/blog and scroll down to the post from Tuesday, October 29th. All that having been said, thank you for joining us today for episode 43 of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. That means you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your smartphone or your tablet or your listening device of choice. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link to you in the blog post. In last week's episode, our topic was building your content marketing team, so putting together the individuals with the skill sets you need to create and implement an effective content marketing program. If you happen to miss that episode, please feel free to click on over to iTunes or to Stitcher or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. So that brings me to today's topic. Today we are talking about a question I see fairly often, and that is, what's the difference between content and copy? As a writer by trade, I tend to get really nitpicky when it comes to using the right word. So sometimes when I go off on a tangent about the difference between content and copy, my buddies will give me a little flack and accuse me of splitting hairs. But it really is important. It's an important distinction because it represents the shift that's taking place in the marketing world right now. And as content marketers, we need to be very conscious of that difference. So the essential difference between these two concepts is this. Copy is sales focused. So copy would be words or ideas strung together with the message of buy my stuff. The goal of copy is for someone to either buy your product or service or take the next step in buying your product or service. Content, as we content marketers know, is more value focused. So instead of saying buy my stuff, content says I'm giving you something of value. And as we know, there are many different ways that content can deliver value. It can educate, it can inform, it can inspire, it can even entertain. So that's the basic difference between the two. Now, the first point I want to make is that I don't ever want to imply that content is quote-unquote good and that copy is quote-unquote bad. Now, given that this is the Content Marketing Podcast and we are all committed to producing good content, that's kind of which way we lean. But content alone will not sell your products or services. And I think I've said on this podcast before, there are many voices out there saying, oh, advertising is dead and we're just not going to be producing that copy anymore. But my voice is not one of those, because I think content, what it does is it serves to create a foundation of familiarity and a foundation of trust, so that when you do come on with that marketing message, with that copy, it will fall on more welcoming ears because you do have that foundation. So I see content and copy as kind of like a yin and yang of a very complete customer marketing experience. And we'll get a little more into that here in a bit. So good copy is an absolute essential for successful marketing, even if that program is committed to delivering valuable content. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to point out the differences between the two so that we can approach our marketing strategically and use both in the best way possible. The second point I want to make is, yes, there are some gray areas between content and copy. For example, I'm sure you've been reading a magazine and come across what we call an advertorial. So this would be some content that was produced by an advertiser, and you can always tell because it's got the word advertisement written at the top of it to distinguish it from the magazine's regular content. And those are usually a blend between copy and content. So for example, okay, it's Halloween, so you may have been reading some kind of magazine, some kind of home or maybe a parenting magazine, and you may see a spread about party ideas, Halloween party ideas, and that might be sponsored by a candy company. Now there may be content, bona fide content in the form of party tips, how to arrange your party or games to play at your party, or ideas for centerpieces or table settings and that kind of thing. But chances are there's probably also a healthy dose of copy. So places where the ad would talk about how great our candy is, how delicious it is. You'll be the most popular house in the block because kids will want to come and get some of our candy at your house. And if you have the candy at your party, then it's sure to be a hit. So those usually kind of straddle the fence between content and copy, and they kind of approach it in various ratios. So I did want to point that out as well. It's not always a cut and dry difference. Okay, this is content and this is copy. They do kind of intermingle. So what I've done is I put together a few questions to help you kind of distinguish content from copy if you ever find yourself looking at something and wondering which is which. So the first question to ask is, does this have inherent value? If it does, then it's content. Now, inherent value, I mean, does it have value in itself? So content has that inherent value, whereas copy exists for the purpose of selling a product or service. And the example I want to provide when we talk about inherent value is my old tried and true example of the little recipe slips that you pick up if you are, and this happens, you see these a lot around the holidays. You might be shopping in your local grocery store and you might see a display of chocolate chips, of chocolate chips to use in your baking. And there might be a little tear-off paper pad next to that display with a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. And that recipe has inherent value. So it is something that you can take and use separately from whether or not you buy that particular brand that has the setup, but it has value in that you can take it home and you can use it to create something. You can use those instructions to create something. So that's what I mean when I talk about inherent value. So if it has inherent value, it's probably more on the content side. Question number 2 is the value contingent on the purchase of the product or service? If it is contingent, then you're probably looking at copy. And just to cite an example of this, a few months ago, I was working with a client to help them promote a seminar via email and via social media. And I said, okay, well, let's, use this classic content marketing approach and let's pull out some tidbits to share as we promote this seminar. And what they did, the first thing they did is they sent me, oh yeah, here's some content to share. And they sent me an outline of what was going to be covered in the seminar. Now, this data that they sent me, it's not that it doesn't have any value, but to really get the value attached to it, you would have to attend the seminar. Another example is the summary that you read on some book covers. If you're browsing in a bookstore and you're trying to figure out which book or books to buy, it's usually books plural in my situation, unfortunately. But you would probably read through the back of the book, and there would be a little summary that talks about the contents of the book and give you an idea about its content. And there might be some very useful information in that summary, but to get the full benefit, you would have to read the book. Now, to contrast that, a more content-focused approach to selling a book would be, for example, if you went on your blog or on your website and posted an entire chapter of the book as like a free sample, because that has inherent value and people can read it and take in that content and then use that to decide whether or not they want to purchase the book. But benefiting from that particular piece of content does not require buying the book. And I hope this makes sense. It sounds a little convoluted, but it makes a little more sense if you think about specific situations. So basically, if getting the value is contingent on buying the product or service, it is probably more to the side of copy. Another example would be, we talked about the little recipe pads that you tear off at the grocery store. Well, if we're talking about the recipe that's actually printed on the bag of chocolate chip cookies, then in order to use that, you would have to buy the bag of chocolate chip cookies. So that would be more on the copy side rather than the content side. So that's question number 2. Question number 3, what is the logical next step, or what is the desired next step for the reader, the viewer, or the listener of your content? So what is this? What is the goal of this piece? What is it? What do you want people to do after consuming this piece of content and or copy? If that desired next step is either call for an appointment or place an order or sign up for your workshop or buy your book, then we're talking about copy. Whereas if it's something like set your clocks ahead because daylight savings time is ending. If that's the next step, if it's something separate from that whole sales cycle, then you're probably talking about content. So if you're confused and if you're looking at a piece of piece of writing or video script or something and kind of wondering which camp it fits into, just think about what that desired next step would be. And if it would be to, jump into the next step of the sales cycle, it's probably copy. Whereas if it's more take some steps outside of the sales cycle, whether it's to do something differently or to go ask your doctor about something or to whatever, to plant more annuals in your garden, then it's more on the content side. So I hope that makes sense. And as a final point, we did mention that there are some gray areas like the advertorials that you may have seen in a magazine. And I just want to point out that not only can content and copy coexist, but they should coexist. They should both be present in any marketing program. And I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. The way that they work together is that content allows us to build that foundation of trust and that foundation of familiarity so that when we do come out with our marketing message, in other words, our copy, that can help us seal the deal because the content has helped us create that foundation. And if you look at each in isolation, copy without content is just being that pushy sales guy who only knows new and interesting ways to say, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. But if you look at content without copy, the way I like to put it, to borrow some terminology from the dating world, that will get you stuck in the friend zone. Now, you guys, I know you know what I'm talking about. If you have ever had a crush on a girl and she tells you things like, oh, you're so sweet, you're so nice, I'm so comfortable with you, and what you really want to do is, move in for the kiss and seal the deal, but you're stuck in the friend zone. That's kind of what content can do for us. People, if we don't have that copy, if we don't kind of move in to entice people into that sales process, then people just kind of look to us as a useful source of information or entertainment or whatever it is we're providing. But, of course we have to make money at some point. So we do need to come on with that copy and just rely on the content to have built that relationship that makes people more willing to listen to that marketing message when it does come about. So you do need both. And what we as marketers need to do, we need to understand the difference so that we can use both strategically. Again, I hope this makes sense. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me and I will share that information at the end of the podcast. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I want to talk about setting up a content collaboration system. As we've mentioned on this podcast before, a successful content marketing program is not something that is siloed in the marketing department or in the PR department or communications. It really has to reach out and touch everyone in the organization. Everyone has to be behind your content marketing program, and everyone has to understand that they have some input. They can contribute those stories and those ideas for your content going forward. So what you need to do is make it easy, make it really easy, or as my husband says, make it duck soup easy for anyone in the organization to either submit ideas or to share audience feedback. You might have set up a podcast and you might ask formally for feedback, but maybe someone on your sales team was chatting with the customer and the customer made a comment about the podcast. You would want to know about that. So you need to have a system in place for people to send in ideas and for them to let you know what your customers are out there saying about your content. And that system could take several forms. It could be as simple as a dedicated mailbox. When people inside the organization send in those ideas or those comments to a specific email address. So it could be contentfeedback@yourorganization.com. Now, you do want to make sure that someone is checking that email address regularly so that you can keep up with those messages as they come in. Nothing is worse than sending in ideas and having nothing happen to them for months at a time because no one's checking the stupid email address. So if you go the email right, just make sure you check on that regularly and that you get back with people when they send you something. Make sure you let them acknowledge that you received their communication and that you will be back in touch with them to let them know the next steps. The second option you might want to look at is a voicemail mailbox. So this would be an internal number, an extension that people would call and get a voicemail, and they would leave their idea or their feedback. Once again, very important to have someone check this on a regular basis, because what you don't want is someone to call in with the greatest content idea ever or that must hear client feedback and to hear that the mailbox is full. So make sure that someone checks that. If you want to get a little more sophisticated, you could do something like if your organization uses Salesforce and you use the chatter system. That's kind of an internal communication system where people can kind of bounce ideas around and collaborate and talk about things. So I've not used it myself, so I don't know exactly how it would transfer, but I do know that you can use it on collaboration projects such as this. Also, if you use project management software, for example, if everyone in the organization is on Basecamp, you could create a project in Basecamp called Content Ideas or something like that and have people contribute to it and discuss it and collaborate on it. Or if you want to get really fancy, you could create your own proprietary app on your intranet. Intranet, that's your internal online system that people can use to submit ideas, to collaborate, to follow up on those ideas, what have you. And the larger your organization is, the more important it is to have a centralized location where people can submit those ideas and discuss client feedback. Because if you have a smaller organization, if you have like 8 or 10 people, then usually, you can just yell across the room, right? And get to the person who is in charge of collecting those content ideas. But if you have a larger organization, you really want to formalize that process and make sure that everyone knows that their ideas are welcome. And make sure everyone knows about it, and also make sure that the content team stays on top of it, that they are taking in those ideas, that they are responding to the people who submitted them, and that they are following up on them. And the ideas that you don't follow up on, make sure to get back to people as well. Say, hey, we loved your idea. Here's why we couldn't use it. Either it's not in line with our editorial calendar or what have you, because you don't want to discourage people from submitting ideas in the future. So make sure everyone knows about it. Make sure you make it easy. Make sure you are staying on top of it, and make sure that you are responding, and you will get great results from your internal content collaboration system. Okay, campers, that is it for me this week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Once again, I want to wish everyone a very happy and very safe Halloween. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really, really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our blog at resonancecontent.com/blog, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. If you'd like to email me a question to cover in an upcoming tip of the week, you can contact me anytime at rachel@resonancecontent.com. And if you'd like for me to come speak about content marketing to your business or your organization, you can find information about my most current talk at contentmarketingspeaker.net. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's is one from Abraham Lincoln. He once said, "If I had 9 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 6 sharpening my axe." Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing, and we will see you again next week. Take care.